All right, and here we're going to jump into some information about the evolving audio marketplace. Again, I'm Erin Cox. For those of you just joining us, I'm Erin Cox. I'm the U.S. publicist for Frankfurt Book Fair, and this is our audio mini conference where we're going to continue talking about audio and how it's changing around the world. And one of the things that we talk about when we talk about audio is sometimes we'll talk about what's happening in individual marketplaces or individual markets. Sort of generally what happens in the marketplace. I'm interested in those things, but I'm also interested in how stories travel. And so I'm excited to bring our panelists from various markets to talk about things in their own markets, but also how stories travel between, and any sort of little anecdotes that we might hear from their countries or their areas of expertise. So I'm going to ask my panelists to each introduce themselves, name, title, company, and maybe just one line about sort of your focus of work, if you don't mind. Victoria, why don't you start it?
Great, thanks for having us. My name's Victoria Gerken, and I'm the publisher at Podium. I sound English, but I am thoroughly American, and so I will be representing America here today. We're an audiobook publisher primarily, but we also have a burgeoning all formats program as well.
Yes, hello, I'm Oliver Daniel. I'm the country manager for Audible in Germany, or rather in the German language countries, which includes Austria and Switzerland as well. I've been with the company for about 8.5 years, and what was my main role? My main role is to make customers, listeners, and publishers happy. So that's my job.
Perfect.
So hello, my name is Mariana Féged. I am in charge of the Spanish-speaking markets and other European markets that are not the German-speaking with Bookwire. And Bookwire is a digital distributor. We connect publishers with the shops. So basically we make the audiobooks and the ebooks that are produced by publishers available in all shops around the world.
So we're going to start to ask each of you, what are sort of the audio trends you're seeing in each of your markets? So Mariana, why don't you start?
Great. Yeah. So speaking about the Spanish-speaking market, I think the first thing that is relevant and that must be pointed out is that Spanish-speaking is broad. So there is Spain on the one hand, but there is Latin America on the other. So we're talking about 600 million people that speak Spanish, but quite different, actually. So one of the big characteristics, more than trends, I would say, that are marking this market is that we have different accents. So in audio, this is a thing, because when you produce an audiobook that is specifically geared to a Latin American audience, it has to be produced with a voice that is adequate for that market. Whereas if it is geared to Spain, it must be, a different accent. In terms of trends, we have really seen in the past years, so the Spanish-speaking market was not like Germany or the US or the UK, where there was a history and a tradition of audiobooks from, cassettes and CDs. That never happened in Spain. I really don't know why. There are many theories about sun and people having tapas instead of listening to audiobooks. Could be. But in any case, the fact of the matter is that audiobooks are new. They really started being known by the population quite recently. The market began with Storytel. Audible has had quite a relevant role as well in getting people to know audiobooks and to use them. So it is really a growing market. It's not a mature market at all. We see 50% growth year on year. And we're really in a sweet moment where people are getting acquainted with this format. So very large growth. Another interesting trend, which I believe could be internationally the same thing, is that the same things that work in print, that work in ebook, work in audio. So the fact of the matter is that a book that has a lot of success, a lot of fans, an author that has a huge community behind will work very well in audio. So there aren't many, big surprises in terms of what works and what doesn't. And that is something that we're seeing more and more. And the last thing would be subscription. So because this is a very recent trend, a very recent format in the Spanish-speaking world, and because it has been really created, the category was created by Audible and Storytel, who have subscription models, more than 70% of the revenue that comes from audiobooks in the Spanish-speaking market is coming from subscription. There is barely no individual single download of audiobooks. So I think that would be overall what's going on in the Spanish-speaking world.
Oliver?
Yes. So I think before we get into individual trends, I just wanted to add to your point when you say we see a lot of growth in Spanish-speaking markets. And so we published this morning the Audible Compass, which is a kind of international research piece.
Yeah, and your colleague is going to speak more about that later.
And I will not take any of the information away from that. But the one data point maybe worth sharing is, and that's, I guess, for all of us relevant and great news, audio is growing around the globe. And this is we've been in Germany as Audible for 20 years almost now, and in the US for 26 years. So it's a growth segment, and that's really good news for all of us. And to be fair, the data, I'm just going to go with the German numbers here for the German audience, and that's my area of responsibility within Audible. So we're now looking at, across the population, at 46% of Germans actually listen to some form of spoken word audio outside music, that is. And that's grown, and that's higher even than during this pandemic. So during the COVID crisis, where we've all seen, I think, a growth across the world, certainly here in Europe. So we've actually topped that number now, and that's really brilliant news. And so that's I would say, is, as I said, I think it's at 4 o'clock. Matthew Gain, who runs the European business, is going to share a lot more data, also for the publishers amongst you, how you can benefit from that growth with Audible, and how we can do that. But in terms of a trend more, and I think we may talk a bit more about genres and titles, I think we have seen quite a spike for the first time since we've started this study 6 years ago in the area of healthcare and wellness. That's certainly been a big trend this year and over the last 12 to 18 months. It's always been a relevant genre and a relevant category, but we've certainly seen a spike like we have not seen it before. And that's something that we're also trying to meet in terms of our offering, both our own productions, but also together with our publishing partners to create various types of, and it's more light content. That's another trend, if you like, we see from the data, which is it's not so much a medical research paper, of course, people would listen to. It is really anything from sleeping aid, helping to fall asleep, to self-care, whether this is a podcast format or whether it's a full audiobook. That's certainly seen quite a bit of an increase.
Yeah. What do you attribute that increase, or do you know yet?
Well, there are various theories. In terms of the data and the research we're seeing, I certainly, when we were struck by this terrible COVID period, that some expected, including me, that there would be actually an interest in these kind of topics during that period. But we saw the opposite. We actually saw a big trend towards escapism, how we call it. So people wanted to be taken away into stories, whether it's comedy, fantasy, crime, thriller, has remained the biggest genre, of course, here in Germany. There was much more people wanted to, there was all over the news, of course, COVID, and during the pandemic, people wanted just to escape when they listened. Many did, at least. And I think now, with this kind of behind us, this is not so nice time, I think people still want to get informed and see, people reflect on their lives, and they want to see, what does it mean for me? It's a bit of a new era for many. And to be fair, we're not living exactly in quiet times now. I think there is certainly a lot going on around us, and people really are keen to understand how the world works and what it means for them personally.
Sorry, one more question. So Mariana was talking about different accents and Spanish recordings. Do you have a similar issue with sort of German language publishing, audiobooks or anything like that? Is that something you see?
So in German language, I don't think it's as pronounced as it is in the Spanish language, because I know from my colleague for Spain that this is a very important factor to support your point there. But we have in Austria, we have a range of narrators and authors from Austria and Switzerland. That it's different. It's not as pronounced. So we do see, for example, Austria and Germany, it is very much a similar most listened to titles we see in Germany as well as in Austria, though it's not a very kind of large difference there. But within Germany even, so one of the areas is regional crime. So we have a very successful Bavarian series about kind of a detective who solves crimes in the Bavarian, Nuremberg and Munich area. That's very successful. And we have a similar series about the northern states in Germany. So yes, it is, but overall speaking, I would say it's not as pronounced.
All right. Victoria, do we have the same accent issue in the US?
I mean, story-related accent issues, definitely. I mean, as a genre publisher, we do, a lot of fantasy, high fantasy, which, tends to need a British accent. Even, it's for the American market, but it's the sort of world that you're getting into. So, yes, accents are very, very important in delivering, the author's work to what, Dion was saying, delivering, a performance that reflects all the work they've done to build those characters is critically important. And so, we spend a lot of time and effort on casting and making sure that that the voice is going to fit the role. But in terms of the sort of the US trends, I agree, like the fantasy boom during the COVID years was pretty significant. But we've also seen a continued now growth in romance, which, you could say is in the self-care department as well. But it having not been all that strong in audio. So it's a very, very big market in ebook. But I'd say the growth in audio has been like over the last 2 years, probably, in romance. And just from a sort of a industry-wide perspective, the market in the US for audio it's about a $3 billion market now in retail, which is about the same as the digital ebook market. We've also seen double-digit growth the last 10 years, as you know, cool down from the COVID 25% growth, but still double-digit in 2022, so 10%.
And what kind of content are people listening to? Mostly full audiobooks or sort of serialized things, short form? Are we seeing something there?
Yeah, I mean the US market is definitely still very download dominated. The strength of Audible obviously brings the credit model into the forefront, so people are tending to buy a audiobook. But I think, Audible Plus, the streaming program, well, it's not streaming, like the limited membership listening. I see Audible people correcting me. Just shout it out. That, that has introduced, I think, the notion for listeners to try new things that they might not have wanted to spend a credit on, to take a risk on something that looks appealing, but that they don't necessarily want to actually buy. So that's been a great discovery mechanism. Certainly we've, gone strongly into that as a genre publisher with a lot of series in our catalog. That's been a fantastic discovery tool. But I think, the idea of being able to present more audio entertainment to people with a lower barrier to get them into it is fantastic, and I think that's what Spotify is going to do as it enters the market with barrier-free listening. Yep.
Mariana, tell us a little bit about, is it mostly full audiobooks that people are listening to in Spanish language, or is it more, are they entering into sort of shorter form or serialization or anything like that?
So I totally agree that these subscription models allow for the consumer to try new things that they wouldn't if they had to pay like the full price to download something. So there have been some interesting examples, and I would say there are tests around serialization and shorter content, and it's starting, I think, to develop. However, the largest portion of revenue and consumption is coming from full audiobooks. What is also true is it comes from full audiobooks, but because of these subscription models, I think compared to other markets, the Spanish-speaking one allows for backlist to have much more opportunity, of being present in people's libraries than...
Everything old is new again, if you didn't know about it, right?
Everything old is new again, and we see publishers very happy being able to, take out of the doors things that no longer have a commercial life on ebook or print. So that's also an interesting factor, yeah.
Is it hard for publishers to sort of keep up with the Spanish language audio market if they hadn't traditionally been creating that content? Yeah.
It's very difficult because it's so expensive to produce. It's still, it's growing a lot, but it's not a 3 billion market. It's a small market. And I think there is a very big challenge for publishers, especially middle-sized and smaller publishers to keep up. So the larger publishers have, the resources, the teams, the money to take over that challenge. But the smaller ones, it's not that easy. It still is a big investment, and it's a lot of work doing something that normally they've never done before. It's a completely different area of expertise, right? Like producing an audiobook, it's completely different. So that's quite a challenge. That's exactly the challenge. And especially the Spanish-speaking market is very, very concentrated. So we have like a couple of very big groups, but then the gap is huge. So the middle ones are much, much smaller.
So there's space there for somebody to go in there and help. Is that what we're hearing?
Exactly. Well, actually, we try that a lot, and we're very happy to have more actors help. Yeah. So what we try to do with our clients, with the publishers, is take all the work from them. So we do the audio production, we finance, we put it as easy as possible so they can launch, but still it's difficult to put out more than, 3, 5, 10 audiobooks into the market in a year for them.
Oh, yeah. What kind of stories, Mariana, you had said if it's a big author in a print book, it'll do well in audio. What books from other countries, are coming from maybe Spanish language markets to the U.S., the UK to Germany? What stories are traveling to new markets in audio format? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think actually we share an author, Brandon Q. Morris. So we have some hard sci-fi that has been successful in the German market that has entered into the US market. Actually, an ebook self-published. A lot of these authors are translating themselves, well, not themselves, but getting a translated edition and then self-publishing in the US. And that's where we discover their work, and then we produce the audiobook edition. So we've definitely had, several German sci-fi and fantasy, and because that's what we do. That tends to be where we've seen success, and where we've been able to pick up the audio rights.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say about this is what we see there is a lot of appetite by our listeners for a very large selection. So the expectation is if you come to a service like Audible that you really have the widest, the broadest, and the deepest catalog and selection you can find anywhere. And we're aiming to, and I think we provide in all of our marketplaces where we operate, kind of with a local team and local language productions where we can provide that. So to your question, do authors and titles travel across countries? They absolutely do. So we will have in all the top kind of high-profile authors and titles available in local language, typically in all of those marketplaces, because that is what listeners expect. And that includes titles like we currently see that the German bestseller list is number one is Ken Follett's latest title, of course. That's obviously available in all languages that we operate, and but also our own productions. And that has been an area of a big focus for us, where we produce originals, but also Audible books, which are more like kind of existing titles that we license and then produce. And that's important. And a good example is, so for those who know the German book market a little bit, Sebastian Fitzek is a very important author here. He's the number one author when it comes to crime for at least the last 10, 15 years. Pretty much every book he releases, he launches, is a number one title. And we've earlier in the year, I think it was in May, we launched one of his successful titles, The Gift, in the United States, and it was quite a success there. And we work with Sebastian on a range of also innovations around that format. So another big title of his is The Therapy, and that's going to be released in 2 weeks on the 26th of October. And that's going to be actually something where we release it in 5 languages, including English, though it's been primarily a German author, and also in collaboration with Prime Video, where on the same day there is a Prime Video series being released. So really kind of creating an ecosystem, like a story world, to tell that story, not just across formats, but also across languages and countries. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, that is exciting. Victoria, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the challenges in the U.S. That in the audio market is oftentimes publishers like a PRH would say we have to, in order to buy the print rights to this book or to acquire a book from an agent, they need audio rights included in that, and that sometimes is sort of a package deal. They will not buy the book without, they will not acquire the book without the audio rights. How much are we seeing that still today with the rise of audio publishers like yourself that are, you know, big and competitive and with PRH audio? So
well, I think, yeah, I mean, the sort of mandate, which I think is what you described, you know, it's definitely has been a thing in the mid-teens, I would say, probably from about 2017 when, you know, traditional publishers realized, you know, what they had in their catalog as books that would be very, very profitable in audio. I mean, from the Podium perspective, we have never relied on licensing rights from traditional publishers, so it hasn't really impacted our business all that much. But, you know, we've obviously been an observer of the trend. But I think now agents also realize the lucrative nature of the audiobook rights and how authors can be benefited actually by having those rights separated and having the best audio partner to bring that title to market by a dedicated audiobook publisher who markets it separately, understands what, you know, Dion was saying. I mean, he's just up there marketing books, and you know, we do the same with our narrators. You know, they have fan bases. You know, authors, fans follow narrators in particular genres, and so we definitely utilize, you know, that interest to sell the audiobook as a separate edition. It's not an adjunct of the book. It is very much a different art form. You know, it's not, and it needs to be treated as such. And yes, there are, you know, big, traditionally published celebrity books that the house is going to do, you know, a big job of publicizing the audiobook, Prince Harry, etc. But for, you know, for a lot of authors, having their audiobook in the special care of an audiobook publisher is the best that can happen. And agents are definitely having those conversations with us. And plenty of times, you know, a print publisher will just take print if that's what they can get. And that is what they might get, you know, because a lot of titles are hitting the market very strongly, especially in romantasy. A lot of independent authors self-publishing an ebook, licensing the audio rights to Podium or another audiobook publisher. And then, you know, a print publisher sees that success on the market and they will then take the print only. So definitely, this is a time of disruption. And I would say it has come around that print publishers will take print.
Are we seeing that in the German language and Spanish language markets as well as the audio rights sort of being parceled out from print and e? When books are being
some cases, I think it's actually very interesting because it's such a large market. So pure players like Podium can exist in the U.S. We really don't have many pure audio players in the Spanish-speaking market. So it's mostly book publishers, and they are trying to, as much as possible, ensure that the audio rights are, you know, bundled together with the other ones. It's definitely a topic, and it is sometimes difficult to maintain it that way because certain agents would want to disaggregate it and therefore, you know, have a larger revenue over the rights. But there's a big effort of the publishers to maintain them bundled, of course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just add for Germany, I think it's a fragmented picture in Germany, but I do want to point out there are big opportunities for audio-first releases, of course. And so we've got a number of, especially around Audible original productions we invest in. So one of the kids' titles we produced a few years ago, it's a series actually called Ghost Sitter. That's also traveled to the US, by the way, quite successfully. This is just an audio release, and other titles like Oris, which is from Sebastian Fitzek as well, as the crime story as an original around an audio forensic. So it's got a really core audio element to the story that leans itself, of course, to our category, and that kind of subsequently became a book because it was very successful in audio. So that's, I think, something where we see a lot of opportunity still.
How much are people listening to maybe English language audiobooks in Europe or in Latin America or Spain? Yeah. Are you seeing any of that? Either of you?
Yes, we do. But I think, again, it's important. And for Audible, I can certainly say this is across the world. We see that phenomenon, which is local language is king. So we're talking about 90+% of consumption happening in local language. So this is an absolute must-have in certainly the more mature marketplaces, but also in less mature ones. So local language is absolutely important. But English is certainly in Germany, I can say, it's the second most listened to language, unsurprisingly. And we see some differences in behavior when it comes to age groups and to genre. So on the podcast side of things and non-fiction podcasts in particular, amongst younger listeners, English has a bit of a higher share than across the segment. But again, I have to say, in Germany, I think we're looking at a number well into the 90s percentage that must be in German language. Yes.
In Spanish-speaking world, of course, also local languages is by far the majority. It is true that there are certain niches, and especially like in Latin America. So the genres that work more in Latin America are nonfiction, whereas in Spain it's more fiction. And in this nonfiction, all that is like business related tends to work well in English. That would be definitely a trend. But I think another interesting thing that you just pointed out is younger generations are much more open to reading in English. So I don't think Spain would be at the forefront of English consumption someday. But I was talking to a Dutch publisher earlier today, and they were telling me to what extent, for instance, in their case, young people just want to read in English, right? So, these new generations probably will be much more open to English, I think.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience for some questions. So be thinking about your questions. Victoria had said that the U.S. market is sort of leveled off and maybe even is plateauing a bit or maybe going down. Well, sorry, we're lower. There isn't as much increase. For the markets where you are seeing still steady increases, do you see a future where it might level off or decrease in terms of exponential growth? And if so, or do you see, like for the Spanish language market, it feels like, there's a lot of room to grow as long as we can get content out there. Do you say 10 years from now we might start to level off? Can you do a futuristic prediction for each of your?
That's like super dangerous, right? Because in 10 years, you're going to say, she was so
everybody
wrong.
write it down. Mariana says this.
Yeah, and then I will be proven wrong for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
it's okay. We'll come back in 10 years and we'll have a whole discussion about it.
And you had no clue.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of room for growth.
Yeah.
So the key factors, I think, would be in Spain, of course, more catalog. And then we are seeing, I think the next year will be a very interesting year. We have to see what's going to happen with Spotify being, if this new model is available as well in the Spanish-speaking world, that will allow for I think, a definite growth of the market. Because, as I mentioned at the beginning, since there is not really a culture of audiobooks, a big part of the challenge is still getting people to know that this exists. So it is the idea of having somebody like Spotify that is already, in people's telephone to push for audiobooks is definitely something interesting. So I would not, it's very difficult to give a number of years, but I would say that the next 5 years for sure, there will continue to be double-digit growth in the Spanish-speaking market, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that is true for Germany as well. So we've seen a 25% increase in listening in Germany this year over last year. So, and audio storytelling has been a long-standing tradition in Germany. So that's certainly a mature marketplace when we look inside Audible. But of course, there are other countries. We're very, very happy and excited. We just launched in Brazil 2 weeks ago. And of course, growth rates are going to be quite different there. It's not exponential, just to be clear on that one. Yeah. Exponential is a different dimension still, but we see double-digit growth in all our marketplaces, and I think that's it's just bound to continue because there are so many opportunities. Even I can mostly speak for Germany, of course. So the whole area of family listening and kids listening. I just listened to another roundtable discussion earlier today where this was looked at as an opportunity, as allegedly still a relatively small segment of the overall category. I can't say this at Audible. It's in terms of the German data from our survey. This is one of the big growth areas. Mm-hmm. It's partly to do with that it's in our streaming part of the membership for Audible listeners. There's a lot of kids and family content included now in Germany and in France, for that matter, as well. So we see a lot of growth there still. And yes, I'm not sure about exponential, though.
Yeah, and to that family listening point, I mean, that was observed on the consumer survey that was done by the APA recently. And, the family listening really picked up during the pandemic, and it hasn't dropped off, which is wonderful. And I think in the streaming service that Audible has, you can have, shorter titles, and children's stuff tends to be shorter. And so therefore, it lends itself to that kind of that streaming model. But yeah, I mean, only, still 50% of people in the United States have not listened to audiobooks. So there is definitely plenty more to be done. I mean, I think, the growth of, niche genres, that's very much where we see that our part can be played in expanding the popularity of audiobooks, is just sort of presenting new types of stories into the market that that haven't been discovered. And right. So sort of lit RPG and, different flavors of fantasy is absolutely what we're discovering and putting in the market.
Well, and I think in some respects, I talk to I work in book publishing, and people are like, people who don't work in the industry say, oh, I don't really read much, but I do listen to audiobooks. And so it's always, you had said it's sort of just another format in which to share stories or information. This is sometimes a way to lure people into these stories, and it's just a matter of providing that smooth transition for them to discover. Right?
Yeah, and the types of books that people who may not think of themselves as readers actually find, very entertaining in audio. And so, we have particular genres that appeal to, young men between 18 and 30, and that is not usually a category that you can grab with books.
Right.
So
exactly. All right, are there any questions in the audience?
I know that accent is a big problem. I am from Puerto Rico, and I did one in America, a voiceover for a company that it was for a credit card, and they needed an 100% Puerto Rican accent person to record that. Of course, I am not a professional, but I could adjust my voice to do such a thing, and I know that's very difficult. When we go to America, I live in America, I live in Tennessee, so I have this is sort of like a Hispanic Southern accent. And one see the difference, and I don't know how much if that's a problem like in Latin America, but in America you have the very Southern, that you go the way down to Kentucky, that is very smoothie, and then you have the North that is a little bit more
we take
simple.
A less is more attitude towards regional accents. Some regional accents need to be represented because they're in the text, and if the author says that a character is from Atlanta and then they speak with a Boston accent, that's going to be a problem for the listener, because it's going to take them out of the story, and they're going to say, well, this is wrong, and that is what we really strive to avoid. But yeah, it's something that we pay a lot of attention to in casting, that a narrator can carry the gamut of the accents that are required in the audiobook, but without being such a strong accent that you also can't necessarily understand what someone's saying. I think that was your question.
Other questions? No. That's back there. Yeah. Raise your hand high, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about accessibility. So earlier you mentioned that the problem with audiobooks is that production costs are pretty high. It's time consuming to produce a really good audiobook. And I was just wondering, now that we are seeing a democratization of kind of production possibilities in terms of written content, so it's easier than ever to kind of write a book and publish it in written format. But probably the opposite is true for audio now. And I was just wondering, what do you think it needs to make audio content more accessible to authors, and how do they need to adapt to this changing landscape in order to stay competitive, if that's a word to use here?
Well, I can have a stab on that one. So At Audible, we have in several countries a self-publishing platform, of course, called ACX. And so in the US and in the UK and other countries, this is available for, and it's widely used as well, to be honest, for authors who would not necessarily have a big publishing house behind them and who help them monetize their content, their titles. So ACX is a great opportunity. It's similar to the kind of the Kindle self-publishing on the ebook side. So that's something I can only recommend in those countries. It's not available globally yet, but it's certainly in the English language territories. That's an opportunity.
There's a question right here.
Hi. Thank you very much for the talk. It was great listening. And it's not exactly a question, but I am blind, and not all audiobooks apps are accessible for screen reader and blind people, which are a public debt. Really, well, it's a target for this type of format. And Audible is very accessible. At least for me, I use VoiceOver. And I just wanted to thank you. It's great.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, no, I don't need to comment. Thank you very much for your kind words. It's accessibility is a big priority for us, and some of you may be aware there's a European legislative coming in as well around EAA. So it's something we've got a team in the US where our product management team sits, and the whole team looking at that. So much appreciated that feedback.
Yes, please.
Yes, I have one question regarding the number of platforms that are available. Because we talked, or you talked actually, about trends towards the future. And what we see, we are from the Netherlands, is that there are many more platforms giving customers the opportunity to use their audio. It's Spotify, it's Audible, it's Storytel, it's Nextory, it's etc., etc. I'd like to know your opinion on that.
On what exactly? Having multiple platforms through which a listener can find audio content?
What is your opinion on the trends towards the future? Because are there going to be unlimited platforms, or are they going to merge, or what is your stance on that?
Well,
Mariana, take it.
yeah, without any doubt, there are several platforms available. Those that you mentioned, BookBeat as well. And then there's also a very big trend that we have not talked about, which is public libraries. That's also another point of access for users. I think we would foresee, it is obvious, like everything in the capitalist world, that there will be a couple of market leaders that will have the largest portion of users. But then I think there's also quite room and space for those that you have just mentioned. I mean, there could be some consolidation in the future, but we're not talking about that many platforms. I mean, if you compare it to ebooks, for instance, it's really a much more reduced number of platforms. They do act globally, most of them. At least, there are several of them that are European, and present in several countries, which gives enough critical mass for them to sustain themselves, I think, in the long run. So, no, I wouldn't foresee an enormous consolidation in the near future.
Well, I could maybe add, so in the previous life I worked for a video streaming service company, and we've seen a similar, I would say, trajectory. But I think there might be some, depending on the country, some level of consolidation happening at one point. We at Audible, we believe strongly in focusing on spoken word as our core proposition. Not all providers do that, and that's good and healthy in a competitive environment. For us, it means we're just going to relentlessly focus on doing the best for storytelling on audio, for spoken word, whether we call that a dramatized version, an audiobook, or a podcast. Yeah. That's what we focus on. That's where we're good at. That's, I think, where we helped grow and innovate in the category, and that's our focus. So let's see. In the end, it's listeners who decide, and we have a strong conviction on our journey.
All right, we have time for one last quick question. Yep.
Okay, hi. I want to ask, what is the best way to produce an audiobook about how to narrate the book? It's a flat or an actor must put, his own expressing, well, what else?
May I take it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. I mean, I think if you're entering the audiobook narration business, being an actor helps. But I also think, it is a different kind of acting. We've certainly had experience with film actors recording audiobooks, during the pandemic, for example. A lot of actors had some time on their hands. It's difficult work, very difficult. And not all of them are really suited to it. It's, you need stamina. You need to basically, go sit in a cupboard and read the book out loud and see how that goes. And again, it's the subtlety of the performance, I think, is really important. So if my advice is, other than practicing reading a book out loud and seeing if you can stick with it, listening to a lot of audiobooks and kind of and connecting with the audio narrator world through trade associations like the Audio Publishers Association, I think is the way to enter.
I can maybe add one anecdote if you have the time. So in Germany, it's one of the few countries, if not the only one, where a very famous example, which is Harry Potter, is actually being performed by two different narrators. There are two German versions of Harry Potter. They're both on Audible exclusively. And one is a much more, let's just say, a traditional reader. It's also a slightly older narrator who does that. And the other version is a much more lively and performance-focused performance. And I can tell you, not the numbers, which one is kind of performing better, but I can tell you that both versions have very avid followerships, and they're adamant their version is a better version. So I'm not saying that the answer will be always different for each listener, but certainly there are, even for the same story, different performances that will find listeners.
That's like Jim Dale and Stephen Fry in the English language.
That's right, that's right.
All right, thank you to all of my panelists.
That's really nice.
Give a round of, yeah. Thank you all for your listening. We appreciate the great questions, and stay tuned for the next event. Thank you.